really exciting panel discussion for you in this next session. So thank you very, very much for joining us. You've got a panel today representing years of experience as PMO leaders, although not to make everyone sound old, I'm definitely the oldest person in the room, forging their own careers, but managing PMO teams. And we've also got representatives from the PMO recruitment world too, the good guys, not the recruiters that we all get tired of. These are the ones fixing some of the issues we have in a little niche world like PMO. We've got representatives here too to get that kind of perspective. So we've got Angela Tompkins here from TransUnion, Louise Milne from Aldermore Bank. We've got Ben Carter, who is Ops Director at Hayes and drafted in very last minute, I think about 20 minutes ago. So well done, Ben. John's joining us from Practicus, and Natasha Allen is here, who is PMO at Harrods. So a good range of industries and experience, I think, for us to have a really great discussion. During the session, for those of you who are joining us, you've got the chat option on the right-hand side. So pop chat in there, let us know you're there, let us know where you're joining from, what time it is, because we've got people all over the world. My favourite so far was Mauritius. I would like to be a PMO in Mauritius, I'd like to say. Just putting that out there. There's also a Q&A button there, so if you've got questions for the panel, pop those in and we'll try and get to those too. And we'll tackle those as we go along. So I think we'll get cracking if that's all right with everybody. That's enough waffle from me. And I think our first question, let's start with the different types of PMO that we have, because PMO has grown up over the years. We've all been in the industry a while and we've seen it evolve, we've seen it change, and we've seen it be very different in different companies as well. But it means different things to different companies, different countries even. What does it mean to you? And I am going to pick on Natasha first. Get us started.
Thanks, Jo. What it means to me, so yeah, you're right. It comes under lots of different, I suppose, guises. You'll have some places that could even call a PMO a benefits office or a benefits realisation office or a project office, portfolio office, programme office, things like that, a centre of excellence. So it can mean lots of different things. But I suppose to me, essentially it boils down to working either within a centre of excellence or within projects, programmes, portfolios, and then also looking at sort of definitions of delivery standards, things like that, and then also ensuring that either your projects, programs, portfolios run to the time, cost, quality. Those are the kind of boils down. I've probably massively oversimplified it, but that's essentially what it means to me, as well as the leadership aspect of it, leading different types of PMO teams, which we might sort of approach on later.
And Ben, John, how do you see that? You spend a lot of time talking to companies who will all have very different ideas, I think, about what they want from a PMO.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Oh, Ben, after you, mate. No, it's okay.
Thank you, John. So yeah, and so I run a program called the Hayes Skills and Learnings programs, and we train people to be PMOs based on not prior experience or academics, but based on the skill sets they fundamentally have. That means we have lots of conversations with lots of people about what it means to be a PMO and what sort of skill sets it takes to do that job. Often, like you say, misunderstood, and speaking to different organizations, they have it in that more strategic sort of space where they need to really think about working across senior stakeholders and being able to deliver insights and deliver programs that way. But equally, some organizations using it maybe wrong, more in a more admin capacity, more sort of pull decks together, collect the status reports, send them out to the right people. And so I guess for us, it's really trying to coach our clients on the value add of these types of people that are coming into these types of roles as PMOs or into PMO functions, making sure they are able to sort of drive data insights, being able to sort of organize teams, be able to work with senior stakeholders, all those types of things. So I guess for us, exactly like you said, Jo and Natasha, definitely loads of scope for interpretation for the clients that we work with.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've seen is kind of that difference between some people, some businesses, organisations see it as a policing function. It's something I've always really shied away from in terms of that terminology. I think, you know, there's a lot more benefit to be gained from a PMO set up in the right place or in the right way. I think it's more about kind of that enabling function, and actually we're there to help a lot of the other areas of the organisation achieve what they need to. And Jo, you touched on different countries having different concepts of PMO as well, and that's something I'm really coming across at the minute. So in TransUnion, we're starting to look at more of a global PMO capability. And when we've gone out to other regions, particularly more around the Americas, PMO to them really means the delivery function. It's very much geared up to the project managers as well, and the delivery side of things. So, you know, that's been really interesting kind of seeing they'll use that PMO terminology, but they probably have different expectations of what that function can really provide. And I think somewhere in the middle is kind of where we're going to land in terms of that balance between delivery and assurance and strategic execution, if you like.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with Angela, actually. So I've been spending the last sort of 12 months building my own little PMO network in the UK to try and sort of facilitate problem solving in the PMO space, specifically in the UK. And when I started it 12 months ago, when I started to speak to senior PMO people, that was, you know, resounding sort of feedback from a lot of people that they were seen as an admin or reporting function. And I think what I've seen over the last 12 months is a lot of senior leaders actually trying to break the mold there and actually sort of work at that, like Ben said, that sort of strategic, you know, director level, you know, leadership team to be able to actually look at the strategic objectives of the organization and really go, right, what do we need to do to get there, and really be that sort of fulcrum between the transformation teams and the senior leadership. So yeah, I think that's early days, I would say, you know, it's a case by case basis, but I would definitely mimic what you guys are saying about what's going on in the UK at the moment.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think we all see it, and you know, I have some particular favourites when, you know, people will come to an interview for a PMO role and say, "Oh yeah, I'm interested in this PMO role because I want to work up to junior PM," and I think, oh, okay, well. Yeah, I think there's going to be some feedback, but I think we're seeing that sort of thing less and less. And the same, you know, from the other end of the scale, from that senior leadership, a number of us now are reporting direct into ExCo members. It's seen as a strategic function. We've seen the rise of the enterprise PMO as well, very much. So I think that leads on to a similar question then. And we've talked with this panel is called the reality of PMO leadership. It's not the job descriptions, and lots of the job descriptions have the same language in, you know, they talk about being outcome focused, driving, facilitating, supporting change, but the expectations still vary massively. So let's talk a bit about that ambiguity that we see in our own roles. And I will start with another PMO leader. I'm going to pick on Louise this time. That job description and the job we actually do day to day, tell us a bit about how those vary.
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, job descriptions can be quite generic and they can look very similar across organisations. But I think, as we know, obviously, the kind of PMO that an organisation might need might be not what they want. And it's trying to bring those two things together and marry those up. I think a prime example is when you do look at an enterprise PMO and how an organisation and their stakeholders can interpret that. One might see that as an administration function, a reporting function, a strategic realisation function, or everything in between, including financial management, down to the depth of POs and whatnot. So it can be really difficult to kind of interpret from some of these job descriptions as to what PMO they are truly looking for. And I think another element to it is that with that ambiguity, it does tend to lend you to feel that actually there's probably less of an understanding of the different capabilities within PMO. And obviously people can specialise in different capabilities and skill sets within PMO. So it's really understanding what you need from an organisation and where your maturity needs to be, and then making sure you're matching up the right person to that role. So it can be very difficult, obviously, trying to interpret it. Obviously, being on the flip side, when looking at job descriptions, I personally do focus in on the capabilities, as in where do we want to be versus where are we now? And obviously, you want to make sure you're honing on both those things. So you're not, to your point, Jo, you're going to kind of set out a net to obviously on a generic role profile, and obviously you're going to get a lot of response to that, and some of that can be seen as kind of a step in, versus those obviously professional PMO people, particularly leaders. You really want to attract the right talent, and that's obviously how you need to get in there and hone in through your job descriptions and your job profiles.
Yeah, I'd agree with what you're saying there, Louise. I think PMO, to be honest, compared to like delivery and project managers, the job title was pretty simple, right? You got project manager, senior PM, program manager, and progressing up. And I think there's clear sort of outcomes there on what they all do and that sort of stuff. I think in the world of PMO, I don't know if you've seen this, Ben, but the job title PMO just means such different things to different people. I've seen PMO analysts running PMO departments in organizations, but they were being called PMO analysts. And then on the other side of things, I've seen heads of PMOs that it's just them in an organization. So I think there's a lot of ambiguity between actually the roles and responsibilities and different job profiles within the world of PMO, which isn't like in the world of project management, I would say.
Yeah, I completely agree, John. And I think my prior experience pre joining Hays, I worked in a global transformation team for WPP, and pre that I was a management consultant for a number of years as well. And I guess within consulting, you used to find PMO was almost badged as almost the rite of passage for graduates coming into teams. You went through the PMO team and then into something else. And I found it really interesting because actually when you got on projects, you found more senior PMOs and you learned way more about the space as you were in those roles. And equally, when I was at WPP and other organizations I've worked at actually within consulting, but PMO often became almost a capture all for other project roles that weren't being done by other people. And so you'd find people who had been very senior PMOs in other organizations doing basically everything from sort of low-level resource planning to sort of high-level strategic thinking and running governance boards. And I think it became that job description was get people in the door, but actually the scope of what they worked on became infinite because it was just everything that everyone else wasn't picking up.
Yeah, and I think oh, sorry, go on, Jo.
No, go on, Angela.
I was just going to say on what you touched on there, Ben, it's kind of that how we get people through the door. But also I've had a number of times in my career, and I'm sure I won't be the only person here, where they've said, if you really wanted, you could be a project manager, or would you be interested in being a program manager? And it's something I've been really passionate about, is that there is a full career to be had in PMO if that's what people want to do, and I think we've got a way to go as an industry in terms of actually building out what that career path can look like and what those different job roles can be. As you said, in the delivery side, it can be a little bit more straightforward, albeit I know there's some ambiguity there as well. But there's always that kind of inference I've found throughout my career of, if you really wanted, you could be a project manager, as if that's kind of the direction you would want to go. And I've always, and I've dabbled in that side of things. But for me, PMO in and of itself really can be a complete career. It doesn't have to then go into the delivery side. It absolutely can do. And I've seen a lot of people do that as well, and vice versa. And that's brilliant. But very keen to kind of fly that flag for PMO being a career in and of itself.
Definitely. And I think we can be, I think that there's an element of PMO tend to see everything going on everywhere. So we have a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of information about all the things going on within a portfolio and within an organization by the nature of what we do. And we're also by nature extremely helpful, and we are there to facilitate and to make things happen. And that can be exactly the value that we offer, and that makes us a really strong component of organization. But it also leads to that sort of confusion of, well, let's just throw that over there, or they'll do it, or no one else wants to do that. And I think that definitely can muddy the waters, like just by the nature of what we do. So how important is the positioning of the PMO in the organization then, in your experience, especially executive sponsorship, but how that is positioned? Angela, you were talking about a new move within TransUnion to a global PMO. How's that? Where do you think that sponsorship bit sits?
Yeah, I think for me, it's absolutely critical in terms of, if you depending on what your objectives are, but to really be able to influence the kind of the organisation, to be able to translate that strategy into a prioritised portfolio, which is one of the key things that particularly an EPMO will be looking to do. that exec sponsorship can't be undersold at all. At TransUnion, we've been really, really lucky. We've got really great exec sponsorship, particularly from the CFO, our Chief Financial Officer. And as we're looking at the kind of global move, we've got the international COO and kind of the global COO really backing this as well. And that's been really important because actually, sometimes what we're asking for is not the most popular. Sometimes we are asking people to fill in documentation. Let's be honest, we have to have this stuff evidence so that at the end of the day we can demonstrate the value that's been delivered. So actually having people there going, actually I really support the fact that we do need a business case there, that this does mean something, is really important. And I think it's really helped us open some doors. I mean, even just from particularly when you're looking at a global organization, you can't possibly know every person that you may need to contact. So actually having them able to facilitate some of those conversations, joining those dots for you, really, really important. So yeah, definitely from my perspective, it's a key thing to being able to successfully build out your PMO and provide the services that will add value.
I think to add to that is obviously by having that executive sponsorship, and they'll help position you in an organisation, that helps to be really clear on the boundaries of your authority. So without having that, particularly at an enterprise level, you will always come to the challenge in terms of if it's not seen as a respective service within the organisation, having that sponsorship to really drive the value and to also be that kind of advocate and ally in those kind of wider conflicts, because it can be challenging, like to Angela's point, sometimes we're asking for things that people do not like to talk about, they don't want to hear, but there is always a reason, there's always the value, and having a strong exec sponsor who's at the forefront of that, it does absolute wonders for your operating model. And obviously then your realm of influence, it gets much, much bigger when you have that exec sponsorship as well.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think as well with that exec sponsorship, they often have some of the levers that we would need in a PMO space, especially within an EPMO as well. They hold some of the levers that we need. So funding, for example, to be able to do some of the changes and deliveries that we do, or to be able to grow as a PMO, whatever our objectives are. But then also the data. So we need data and information to be able to add value and position ourselves in the right way and to be able to deliver the right things. And we need trust as well. So trust in what we're delivering. And a lot of those levers actually come from an exec sponsor. So having that trust, the funding that we need to be able to deliver things, having the data and the information so we ensure that we're doing the right things at the right time. So they do hold quite important levers. If we don't have the sponsorship in place, one of those levers aren't there, then you're not sort of set up for success.
Yeah, I'd agree with what everyone's saying there. I think from my understanding of this over the last 12 months, that's one of the critical questions I always ask a senior PMO leader is where do you sit in the organization currently? I don't know the exact number to this, but I think probably between 60 to 70% of the people in my network currently report into probably IT, an IT director, a CIO. And I think, it makes sense because I think a lot of transformation that's going on in companies at the moment is digital, data, technology related. So I think that's why I think this has happened, but I don't know. I think personally, I don't think that's probably where a PMO should sit. I think it needs to sit in some sort of enterprise level view, whether that's operations a lot of the time, strategically looking across the whole business, or what we've seen recently is a lot of the sort of birth of the chief transformation officer role that's sitting at board level and at exco sort of level. And I think that's positive. And I think as CIOs are quite new, right? But they've developed over years. And I think that's what you'll see with this new CTO. Probably need a better name for it because you get chief technology officers as well, right? But I think that's what we'll see moving forward, hopefully.
Yeah, and John, I think from my experience, what I've seen is where that governance or that sort of reporting process isn't in place correctly, you end up seeing a massive breakdown, and that's where projects often get so far off track because you end up having exec sponsorship sponsoring the sort of delivery of that function, but not the PMO function, and the data gets out of sorts. You don't have a connected view of stuff. We don't report on the same things, and by the time you end up going to board or going to your exec sponsors with your information, it ends up being out of date or wrong, and you sort of almost lose credibility as a PMO function for not being able to bring the right information to the right table. So I think having that exec sponsorship to have the authority and to have the mandate to go out and do that work and to speak to the right people and get the right reports and get the right information is critical to any project success or program success. So yeah, I completely agree with everyone. But I think, yeah, completely having that structure set up from the start makes the world of difference to how they get delivered.
Yeah, I think the sponsorship, the sponsorship issue there is really critical. I think a lot of C-level sponsors of programs, projects, transformation won't really understand what it means to be a sponsor. We see it all the time where either sponsors are way too in the weeds, they're holding sort of stand-up sort of function, things like that, or a lot of the time sponsors just don't understand what it means to be a sponsor. It's just it's the project manager's fault, or the PMO's fault if something goes wrong. It's like, no, you're accountable for this. But it's, if you don't know, you don't know, right? So I think there's a big
everybody needs somebody to blame.
That
is a perfect segue to a question we've had actually from Carsten Florian. So I'm going to pop that up on the stage about how we've seen that role evolve, and especially in the eyes of different project sponsors, because the sponsors are key, aren't they? There's the board support and the executive understanding, but then there are the people that we deal with day to day who actually need to get changes done. So that has really evolved, I think, as well. What do we think about the whole sponsor side of things and their understanding of what PMO are for?
I think it's definitely something I've seen in terms of, I was going to say make or break, that's maybe a bit extreme, but where you've got a really invested sponsor who really understands their role, it could be so powerful. And one of the things we're looking at the minute, and I think is intrinsically linked, is that benefits realization. We really need to understand who's accountable ultimately for this change delivering the value, and who's going to sign up to that, who's going to really champion that all the way through. And various different organisations have done this to a better or lesser extent. Been in organisations where actually we've rolled out sponsor training, and that's been rolled out via the PMO function in terms of what do those roles and responsibilities really look like. And that's been a really useful exercise. And actually, I can't remember now who just said it, but sometimes they just don't know. They're just not aware. And therefore, it's been quite enlightening to say, okay, I understand now what my role should be. And, there is a whole project team there to help deliver this thing. But ultimately, in terms of the value and ensuring that it's the right thing to do for the organisation, you've got to have that kind of right level of sponsorship in the organisation. And just very quickly, one other thing that I've seen is sponsorship almost being too high in the organisation. And again, to that point of they then don't really know, and they've not got capacity. If you're sat on Exco, you're not going to have the capacity to really effectively sponsor an individual change. And that accountability has to sit in the right level of the organisation for someone to be able to affect that change in their day-to-day role. Sorry, clearly something I'm very passionate about, but there's my 2 pennies worth.
No, I think you're right, because particularly around them being positioned, because a sponsor should just be part of the delivery team. And I think when it comes to their perception of PMO, I think it's never assume that people even know back to the first question, what PMO means to somebody. So it's really important to kind of translate what they may know that you do, and reporting and MI tends to be that kind of pivot in to leverage the conversation. And then it's about kind of helping to visualize or articulate what the value is that they will get from that relationship with PMO. Because I think sponsors sometimes can probably not necessarily part of the nitty-gritty conversations, and they should be, but giving them sight of everything that sits around delivery and not just what's in that plan, not just what's in your cost tracker, that there are external factors that when outside of your bubble, that's where we need to start thinking a bit more broadly, particularly from a portfolio perspective. They start to see and understand why you're doing what you're doing, and they start to see, actually, there's benefit here for me as well. As in, I don't want things to be kicking up at the last minute. I want to have some foresight around this. I want to have some insights as to what's going on in my projects or in my portfolio. They start to see what they can get back, and it becomes a bit more of a two-way relationship. Because it can be really tricky if all they see is a report and they don't see the reason why or the value that adds, which I've seen in my time. And like Angela said, it's all about that kind of education and kind of building the relationships, because it's tricky to get past it if you don't.
Yeah, I think with what you're saying there, relating to benefits realization, Angela, as well. I think part of that critical sort of role as a sponsor, I think the PMO being able to partner with the sponsor and the rest of the exco to look at maybe a prioritization process. That's something that we're seeing a lot at the moment, where organizations and PMOs are really trying to prioritize properly. Because I think that's the first step, isn't it, really? And that's, right, what do you want to do for the year? Here's your pint glass. This is how we're going to fill it up with what you want to do. And then it stems from benefits realization, tracking, things like that, resource management, which is, as you probably all know, is a bit of a dark art, isn't it, to really try and get right. But I think it starts there, doesn't it? And I think a good prioritization process can really set a good sort of cultural shift of PMO in an organization. I think if you get that right, that can then link into a lot of the other things that a PMO can do outside of just
And I think that's back to the point of kind of some of the more challenging things that we maybe ask for at times. It's kind of evidencing what's the value of doing this change, and does that return on investment stack up, and obviously it's then getting the balance of how much can you know at the point of prioritization. But back to the point around having that exec buying as well, that's so important for where you do have to say no, and you have to tell people around the exec table that's not cut the mark for these reasons. And actually, we're asking for this information so we can make really informed and effective decisions. So I think that's probably just tying a few different things that we've already touched on there. But actually having that support is so important to be able to have the difficult conversations that ultimately actually set you up for success. I'm sure we've all seen a portfolio way oversubscribed at the beginning of the year, and the whole thing of, projects, they always run January to December, don't they? That's neatly how projects fall in 12-month windows. So yeah.
On the last day of the month, don't forget that one. Always deliver on the last day of the month.
31st of December is very popular for milestones.
I don't know what you mean about oversubscribed portfolios. I have never heard of that or ever come across it, because obviously our prioritization is seamless.
Of course.
But I will flash up another question we've had from the audience, because I think that that is topical as well. And again, still talking about sponsors, but that role of the PMO there in how much empowerment. Now, this will depend on the maturity of your organization for sure, but where do you feel like that line sits? If you're an enterprise level PMO leader, should you be able to stop things, or are you more there to inform the people to make that decision?
I personally think we are there to facilitate the decision making and give that the best possibility of success. So our positioning is that obviously we shouldn't necessarily say we can halt it, but we are in a unique position, a very privileged position, to see the portfolio landscape, and it's about equipping Exco and obviously C-suites with that information, those insights, those lessons learned. What have we seen go wrong previously? What recommendations we would put forward, but they are ultimately accountable for that. So obviously it is back to the oversubscribing of a portfolio. We will have all been in that position where we are providing endless streams of insights and like examples of why this won't work, scenario modeling, but ultimately people sat around that table, they are the ones that are accountable for how the strategy is delivered, how investment is met, and obviously what return on investment we will get and how we use those people. So we are very much there to enable and facilitate the decision making, but I don't think we should be saying. I mean, as much as we might like to at times.
That word being accountable and accountability and ownership is such a big thing when it comes to delivery. And I know I'm sure many of you have been in the situation where the roles and responsibilities and the accountabilities aren't clear, even at C-suite level, exec level, and that ownership and them knowing what they are accountable for, what decisions they will need to make based on the data and the information that we gather, the scenarios we put forward, all of that data and information that we then make into concise headlines for them to be able to for us to facilitate those decisions that they need to make. But getting those roles and responsibilities and accountabilities defined up front before we even run away and try and do all of these things in the project that we're trying to deliver, or the projects in our programs or across our portfolio, is so important that before we run away and do that people understand what they're accountable for, what they're responsible for.
I guess, Natasha, sorry, I guess within that as well, just as well as the roles and responsibilities, also the thresholds in which something should be escalated or something should be halted or where something should be. And I think having that set from the outset as part of almost the business case, sort of part of the project, and making sure that people are held accountable to it, it's nice and transparent, people know what the thresholds are. I think it just massively facilitates that conversation at exec sponsor level to talk about, why are you escalating this? Why are we suggesting it should be halted? Why are we suggesting a different route, or whatever it might be? And something we teach all of our learners on program is that sort of upfront business case writing, and making sure we quantifiably put the sort of thresholds in places to which risk gets escalated, or in which a project needs to be paused or reset or rebaselined, or whatever it might be. I think all of those things fall into the remit of setting it up front and making sure it's nice and transparent for the program, for the program sponsors, but also for the people working on them. So when it's suggestion of halt, it's for a reason within the parameters already set.
I think as well, looking each other in the eye before kicking off, because these sort of things can get drawn in a diagram or put in a PID, put in a business case, and people flick through it and think, yep, sign that off, and then it gets forgotten about and gathers dust on a shelf somewhere. But I mean, actually looking, in the eyes and saying, do you understand what you're accountable for, and having discussions up front. Because sometimes it would have been written somewhere, but whether that's really understood, absorbed before we go on and deliver, I think that's another thing as well.
So Ben, you mentioned very briefly at the beginning, but Hays have a skills academy, including PMO skills. So PMs, I think BAs, but PMO as well, which I think is quite an innovation in, even in the last few years in PMO as a career. Who is approaching you for people to, that need people from that? Is it PMO leaders, or is it executives who want to draw that talent into their organisation? Do people even know?
To be honest with you, it's a complete minefield for us to sort of navigate and understand who our buyer is. If I'm completely honest, because it is so varied. We've got your sort of PMO senior leaders who are sort of buying this from us, but equally you've got your CTOs, your chief transformation officers separately to the technical officers, and your CIOs also, and just general sort of actually project teams sort of trying to resource their teams as well. What we sort of, I guess, to set the context, what we did from our outset was we looked at it and said, we fundamentally believe the skill sets that make you a good BA could also feed into what makes you a good project manager, could also feed into what makes you a good PMO. A lot of those skills cross over, stuff like being able to work with senior stakeholders, being able to do some level of data analytics, being able to run a project plan from start to completion and sort of follow something through, and all of those things. And so we started to adapt and build a curriculum that made sense, that we could take really talented individuals and give them the upskilling into all those different areas, and then hone them into where they're really, really good. And so that's kind of what we go to market with, and what makes sense, and the conversations we get to have, which are quite nice. And going back to almost the job description conversation, less I need a PMO, but more tell me about the skill sets you're missing in your business, or tell me what you're trying to achieve, and we can suggest what the right person for that job, and we can badge it however we want once we're in there. And often that forms of sort of a PMO conversation, but actually from the outset talking about skill sets that are missing with a CIO or a CTO or your PMO leads, rather than just saying I need a PMO and then us trying to work out whether we have one or not.
Definitely a more constructive way around, that's for sure. John, I guess the same question to you, really. How I know you're developing, or developed even, a PMO network through Practicus. Who's coming to you? Are you approached by PMO saying, I need a job? How do I get one? Are you seeing the C-suite executives come and say, help me out, I need good quality PMO, you've got a network, you get it? Or is it people like us hiring PMO, saying, please help us, we need somebody who actually knows what PMO skills are and doesn't send us a bunch of BAs because they've got change experience. BAs are lovely, by the way, we love BAs, but they're not PMO.
No, you're absolutely, to be honest, all of the above, to be honest with you, and that's what I was really keen to do when setting up the network, is not just have a network of PMOs, but actually have delivery people on there as well. heads of transformation that have both, I suppose, in one department, and also sponsors of the sort of the PMOs of the world as well, because I think it's important to get different lenses from different people. So yeah, absolutely, everybody's been involved. I started it, so just a bit of background about Practicus. We've been doing change and transformation for coming up to 20 years next year, so we've been doing it a long time, and we've worked on about 170 different PMO projects over our years. So the reason why I started the network, simply because I'd recruited quite a lot of PMO leaders over my time, and found that through speaking to these sort of people that actually the perception, particularly in the UK, was pretty poor. I think the brand PMO gets a pretty bad reputation sometimes, and you see it at some companies at the moment, innovation offices happening and all these different, just
value
taking the word,
office.
all of that's happening, right? And just taking the word PMO and putting it in the bin, which is ridiculous. But then there's an opportunity, so that's why I set it up, really. So it is, generally for PMO leaders, it's for delivery people, and it's for sponsors as well. Anybody that wants to know more about PMOs and the challenges. And what I found is there's probably about 12 challenges that I've seen so far that everybody's going through. Things like prioritization, we've touched on, benefits realization, sponsorship, tooling. There's 12 that I've seen. And what's really interesting is actually everybody's going through the same challenges, no matter what sector you're in. But there isn't the same solution because of the culture of the organization, budget, people involved. It's all different. So that's where I think it gets really interesting as well. So yeah.
Fascinating. Really, really interesting insights, I think, into the, both sides of the industry that we're in, or all the sides of the industry that we're in, and the complexities, because I do think it's massively matured. I think there's one last topic I'd love to cover, if we can, before we run out of time, because we've got 9 minutes left. And that is, we're talking about the reality of PMO leadership here. So working in change, maybe it's not just specific to PMO, but what does that look like for all of you from a work-life balance perspective? Because change is by its nature a changeable job. We don't have a day job that we go and do and it's the same every day. The projects change, the programs move on. The workforce can often be quite transitory as well. So I will start with the PMOs, and I'll come on to you, John and Ben, as well, about what that means. I think the recruitment work-life balance is worse than the PMO work-life balance based on when everyone responds to emails. But let's start with you, Natasha. What's it like balancing a busy PMO role with having a life?
Good question.
And having COVID right now, so hats off to you for being here.
Tracking on, and if you can hear crying baby, there is someone with my child. My husband's downstairs, so I can hear her crying, which actually brings us very nicely onto this topic.
Segue, yes.
I know. But yeah, work-life balance. It's funny because I think it was a TED talk, I think, on Simon Sinek did a TED talk, I think, about work-life balance, and actually is there such thing as a balance, because a balance insinuates there's like opposing forces and you have to get them balanced, right? It's not always going to be like that. It's kind of interchangeable, but I think you have to be, it sounds to be funny and no puns intended, but even in life as well as in our jobs, in what we do on a day-to-day basis, we need to be able to prioritize and rank what we're doing, whether it's at work and the projects that we're doing, and be able to stop, start, continue some of the tasks, functions, some of the projects, the programs that we're doing, but also in our life, like what's the things that we should really stop, continue doing. We should look at our own resources at work. Are we putting our time, our funding, our resources essentially into the right things? But again, you should be doing that in your life as well. Are you doing the right things that are good for you? And I think you can't do it all. I think growing up, we had this phrase about doing it all. I don't think you can. I think you need to be able to pick what is right for you, what's right for the work, and be able to contribute to the things that contribute the most to your own goals or your work goals and stuff like that. So I don't think there's ever a real balance between the two. I think it's interchangeable, and I think it's just, as well as in work, outside of work, looking at priorities, your resources, your stakeholders around you, and constantly analysing those and picking and choosing what's right for you.
I think that's a fascinating reflection, actually, that maybe the roles that we had give us really good skills for managing that, in that we need to be bang on with prioritization and understanding trade-offs and where to put our energy and where we're going to get the value, and that in life as in work. So I think it's absolutely spot on. And I know the phrase, we can have it all. I particularly like the phrase, you can do anything, but you can't do everything.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what we have to remind ourselves often, is you do need to choose, and that there's always trade-offs. Angela, have you got any thoughts on the same topic? Any different perspectives?
Yeah, I was just reflecting actually when we were talking about prioritization, and I don't know whether this is technically irony or not, but when it comes to the annual prioritization cycles, that is when I feel my balance goes more to work, and that's okay, because there'll be other times when it doesn't go that way. But you know, in PMO, there are certain cycles of activity, I would say, in my experience. And although we're trying to move to more agile ways of working, there are inevitably times of either the month or the year where actually everything kind of goes, and you've just got to get a certain thing done by a certain time. You know, we're generally all bound by financial cycles. They do work in a relatively cyclical way. So we have to fit in with those. So that's when I'd say, actually, do you know what? Yeah, it wouldn't be the ideal kind of 9 to 5 working, but equally there'll be other times where, you know, you've got that quiet week in the month. My job tends to work in those monthly cycles because of things like the reporting cycles. There might be a week of the month where you can barely contact me because, you know, I've got, you know, 5 different reports and all the rest of it, and I could go down a whole other road of kind of how we try and get everyone kind of talking to the same information. So I kind of, you know, it's a different take on exactly what Natasha said. I don't think there's this kind of 50-50 balance or any given percentage. I think it just kind of works its way through across the year, and you just have to be kind of mindful of that. And when it gets to a point where, do you know what, I've been working 12 hours a day for, you know, 3 months now, that's probably a time to reassess. But I think, you know, there's always going to be ups and downs. I think the other thing for me, and this may be controversial, but it's kind of starting to get to a point where don't feel guilty when it is a bit quiet and you can take that time back, because so often it's the other way. Do you know what? Actually take that time back when you need to. I don't have children, but I have a dog. So if she needs to go to the vets and I seem to have the world's poorest dog, you know, I'll go and do that, and various things. You know, people with kids, if they've got school plays or the poorly, whatever, you know, and I think COVID has hopefully allowed us to embrace that a bit more. Yeah. You know, people are working from home, and therefore it is easier to nip out and do these things. You know, if I was in Manchester 5 days a week, I wouldn't be nipping out to take Margot to the vet. So I'd have to really think about that and probably end up taking half a day off work and use my annual leave. So I think from my perspective, COVID has actually taken us a big step forward in actually having a better ability to balance where needed and respond to life and work.
Definitely. I think it has really opened up opportunities. John, are you seeing a different set of expectations from recruiters and from candidates over the last year or so?
Massively, yeah. We looked at the data back in 2022 about our LinkedIn responses, and for the first time ever, salary, day rate, remuneration got removed from the top spot. And actually, it was what's the work-life balance, you know, what's the remote working like, and things like that. And I think through the conversation that I have, I think hybrid is probably everybody's sweet spot. I don't know about you guys, but yeah, working 5 days a week at home got very lonely very quickly. We're social animals, aren't we, at the end of the day? So, and I think that's what we're seeing a lot more of now. And it just comes down to trust. But yeah, I think this remote working revelation, I think hybrid is usually the way to go now, and is the setup, and I think that pretty much works for everyone by and large. So
agreed. Well, I'm really conscious we're running up against time. I think we could probably keep talking for the rest of the afternoon, or at least I know some of us could, and there's so many topics we've covered in there. But thank you so much, all of you, for giving your time within that work-life balance and juggling dogs and children. And hopefully you couldn't hear my cat trying to tunnel through the door. He's quite a small cat, but he can put out quite a lot of noise when he wants to get in. But I think we've put a toe into the water there of the reality of what it's like working within an organisation as a PMO and what the expectations are around there. I think it's been absolutely fascinating. So I really want to thank you all. Everyone can be found on LinkedIn. Ben, I know you're a Hayes man. John, Practicus is the network that people need to be looking for. All of us out there on LinkedIn, so by all means ping us and get in touch. But you will also find some of the panel, those of you in the audience, you'll find some of the panel over in the networking area. So if you want to head over to the tables or head over to the zone where you can catch up with people, you'll be able to chat to people and speak to them there, for those that can stick around and aren't rushing off to prioritisation meetings, because it is that time of year. But thank you again, everybody, for all of your time. I think that's been absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you.